instead it chose to privatize the domain name system. And in order to make that successful, it helped facilitate the establishment of a multi-stakeholder ICANN, where you have strong advocates for intellectual property, strong advocates for free speech, strong advocates for registries and registrars, all competing in what can be a very messy process. This process, this effort that we're now engaged in is no different. There are, in fact, two processes, as Steve alluded to. One is the transition of the actual the oversight of the functions to the multi-stakeholder community, and as Suzanne mentioned, that is pretty far along, and we probably will see a draft, I think, of what they have in March, if not earlier. One of them, the IETF, has already come up with a proposal there. But that is very much a multi-stakeholder organized effort. The second, as Steve alluded to, is related to accountability. And accountability is an important factor in a multi-stakeholder model where there is no one party in charge, where there is the possibility of capture, and where the success is determined based on participation. And so, as Steve urged, I would urge all of you as well to participate in the effort to ensure that ICANN's accountability is what it should be, and certainly doesn't diminish after the contract goes away. Now, in the accountability process, there's really, according to the draft charter that's going around right now, there will be two buckets of work, or two work streams. One is going to be focused on accountability mechanisms that need to be in place before the transition can take place, or need to at least be committed to and take place shortly thereafter. An example of that would be the affirmation of commitments that Steve alluded to. Now, there's been all kinds of speculation about whether ICANN would or would not ever pull out of the affirmation of commitments. I think at the board and the staff level, though, there's strong recognition that should ICANN stop doing these reviews, that our credibility would quickly go down the toilet. And so one thing that this group may look at is incorporating portions or all of the affirmation of commitments into the ICANN bylaws. Something else, another accountability effort, like more transparency on ICANN's, travel arrangements or something like that, not really related to NTIA's role. A good thing, to have. More transparency is always better, but can happen over a longer term practice. But again, this is a private sector led process. Both of them are, and their success will really depend on the robust participation of people like Steve and his constituency in the process. The last point I'd like to make just quickly is that what happens if this fails? What happens if the multi-stakeholder community can't reach consensus on transitioning the agreement, as well as ensuring ICANN has sufficient accountability mechanisms in place? The IANA functions, these technical functions, will continue to chug along. They're clerical in nature. They won't depend on the corporate organization of the entity performing them. But the impact, I think, will have a much greater impact on internet policy issues that are much more important than ICANN. Because I think at that point, if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't work, the rest of the world will look at this and say, well, this just proves what we knew all along, which was when the U.S. government is in control, that's great, and when it's not in control, it wants a multi-stakeholder model. And I don't think that's the message we want, because I think there are a number of countries who do want to move issues like online infringement, like privacy, cybersecurity, into a government-only environment like the UN or the International Telecommunications. So it's really important for the community to come together and figure this out. The target obviously is September 30th, 2015, when the base term on the ICANN functions contract expires. If it takes longer, that's fine. What's most important is that we get it right, not that we get it done at any particular time.
Yeah, so the most important way to think about this, thanks Jamie, is as an opportunity. I mean, this ICANN functions contract itself is this arcane, very technical part that needs to be handled correctly, that transition needs to be fluid. But the announcement to undo that contract relationship that's existed for so long creates an opportunity for us to have a conversation about general operational accountability, which Steve referred to, that we've been just putting off having, really. Right? I mean, there have been mechanisms that have been put in place inside of ICANN for review, et cetera, but an overall hardcore accountability has something that's been a conversation we keep kicking the can down the road. And so we have to regard this time in our history as an opportunity to make ICANN be the organization we want to be. Now, in order to turn this panel from what Jamie described as an esteemed panel into a steamed panel here in the next few minutes, I'm going to ask a couple of questions and see if we get things going a little bit. One of the issues that comes up in this town is this notion of capture that you raised, that Shane raised to some extent, that a lot of people woke back up to the notion of ICANN, 8 years ago when it was all in the news that the ICANN function should be turned over to the UN, et cetera. The United States government has played a very significant role in making sure and sort of pushing back on that notion around the world that it should be a governmental function instead of this multi-stakeholder model that we've come to rely upon. So what kind of commitment is the U.S. government prepared to make to continue to fight that fight, even in the absence of a specific contract that might be in place?
Well, like I said, I think we would absolutely be committed to continuing to fight that fight. I think there is absolutely no question. We tried to be as very clear as clear as we could possibly be that under no circumstance would we find acceptable a proposal that actually sought to replace our role with the role of a government-led sort of activity or an intergovernmental body. That's simply off the table from the get-go. So I think we would absolutely, yes, continue to make that argument and make that case. But you did get at the point of capture. It's sort of, I think the way Larry put it in Los Angeles was, what would happen in our absence, right? If somebody were to try to hijack the board, or if the board were, strangely enough, to go rogue one day, what mechanisms need to be in place so that the community that is being served has confidence. That's really what so we've been very grateful. People have had confidence in the role we've played, but it's largely just, we haven't exercised muscles, so to speak, if I may say, right? It's more, how did somebody put it in Los Angeles? It's more the threat that we might have done something. So absolutely, we've taken that on board, we understand that, but we think the community is mature enough, and so that's what we're looking for. I hope I've answered your question.
Steve, thank you. Steve, you talked about the new GTLD program, and one of the conversations that's swirling around is this notion of stress tests, and what are the kind of scenarios that would evoke the need for accountability mechanisms. And obviously, a lot of your constituents have been stressed over this the new GTLD program, this rapid expansion, et cetera. I mean, what is it you think needs to be in place to have more accountable mechanisms?
Well, that's the $64 million question here, but I think one thing we need to be able to do is as Jamie referred to, make sure that some of the protections that are in the affirmation of commitments are made, to the extent we can, permanent and much more secure than they are in their current status. Now, one that's very important, and I know is going to be very controversial internationally, is the ICANN commitment to remain a U.S. not-for-profit corporation. It's headquartered in the United States. Its contracts are subject to U.S. law. This is an extremely important feature of the ICANN environment for all intellectual property owners around the world, I might say, not just in the United States. So we need to find some way to make it clear that that's going to remain the case, and that's going to be quite controversial in the debate that follows. But this is why I think the business sphere and intellectual property interests in particular need to be engaged.
Shane, part of the conversation that's happening right now is that, well, we need to have this IANA transition happen, this technical transfer of functions happen, and that the discussion about accountability is a longer discussion, right? And there's, of course, fear in the community that when you say that, it means that, well, we'll give up the tether and we'll promise to have that conversation later on, right? And we've all witnessed that not happening. So there's this conversation about what needs to happen before a transition can happen. What aspects of accountability need to be pushed in front of a transition in order for the community to find it acceptable, in order for USG to find it acceptable, discussions of people talking about being able to spill the board, etc. What are your feelings on what needs to happen before a transition happens?
Just to be clear, the function's working. We don't need to change the current function. There is a will to change the function because it was something that the U.S. government promised back in 1998. But the actual function is not under any sort of duress. It's not functioning. It doesn't need an upgrade. It's working. So the choice to do this is to make sure that as we do, we keep it technical, that we don't allow any political interference. And you might remember in this space, but Dr. X was a concern to some people, and they voiced their opinion to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government said, we understand that, but this is a multi-stakeholder process, and we're not in the job of editing the internet. And the ICANN board chose to put Dr. X in, and we've had no problems with it since. So, we've had that experience that we've dealt with it from the perspective of people that didn't want something in. We need to make sure that anybody that is unhappy about a choice, especially with these new top-level domains coming in, a lot of them seem rather innocuous, .golf, .happy, .film. But there's going to be people that care about .film, or they may care about .dogs. They may, there's other extensions in there that they just may not want to exist on the internet because they have, political or religious feelings about it. So we need to make sure that we do not have a pathway for that dialogue to happen at a technical function level, and that's very challenging. Part of the challenge of the internet, even this late in the game, is we're still dealing with the first generation of the people that actually created most of this technology. Candidly, I feel very fortunate to be living at the time of that, because you could either call or email most of the people, and they would actually respond to you because they're very proud of the work that they did. So I think as a legacy, we owe it to them to be very thoughtful about how we manage this forward. The bigger challenge is not letting a person, this be a personality or an emotionally driven decision. It needs to be very technical in its function and have a layout on how the policies go forward. And that's little p, not big P. It's literally the protocols of how this gets managed. The accountability of ICANN is very important for its own existence. ICANN has been stress tested quite a bit in different ways that it's had to manage very tricky issues. It tends to be the tip of the internet sphere. It doesn't really want to be that. It wants to be the technical coordinating function, which is what it is actually designed to do. But it's taken that on, and it's done a very good job, and nothing's broken ICANN so far. And we've had more participation. I'm hoping that you guys will consider being part of this participation as well, as Steve's called out. So I think that's our biggest challenge, is understanding that the accountability elements are very important, not only in the ICANN function, but for ICANN itself. And these are two parallel paths. They may interconnect at some point, but they are not actually meant to connect. There are two separate things that are going on.
All right. Well, as Shane said at the beginning of her statement, read a couple articles, listen to a couple of webcasts, and make some decisions about what you'd like to see happen in this. Because this is about the future of the naming system that we're talking about, and that conversation is happening today. Talk to Suzanne about what you want the U.S. government to say when it gets to ICANN. Talk to Steve and I about how the new GTLD program has affected you and the protection of intellectual property, etc. And we will all jointly commit to making Jamie's life miserable. And that's a commitment we're happy to participate in. So please join me in thanking the panel for sharing the wisdom.